I'd told my daughter not to marry that man. I said it once, calmly, at her engagement dinner. I said it again the morning of her wedding, while she stood in front of the mirror in her dress. She didn't speak to me for almost a year after that. She married him anyway, had a son with him, divorced him 4 years later, exactly the way I knew she would, though I never once said I told you so. Not once. After that, she rebuilt everything. Good job, good friends, the kind of life people post about. And somewhere in that life, I became the thing she didn't want anyone to look at too closely, the mother who'd been right. So when I started teaching her son the things she called old-fashioned, how to read a room, how to never get in a stranger's car, how to scream and fight and run if someone ever grabbed him, she didn't see a grandmother protecting her grandchild. She saw an old woman who couldn't let go of being right. And the day she stood in her doorway and told me I wasn't welcome in her son's life anymore, I didn't argue. I just nodded, got in my car, and drove home. I had no idea that 8 months later, those exact lessons would be the only reason her son came home alive. And I had no idea that when he did, it would be too late for her to take any of it back. If you've ever been the one who turned out to be right, and it cost you anyway, stay with me, because I think you'll understand this story more than most. Hit like, subscribe if you haven't, and tell me where you're watching from, because I read every single comment and I'd really love to know what you would have done in my place. My name is Carol Bennett. I'm 61 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that being right was supposed to count for something. Nobody tells you that it doesn't. Nobody tells you that you can be right about the one thing that matters most, and it will cost you your daughter anyway. I want to start before Tyler, actually. I want you to understand who Megan was before any of this, because I think it matters. She was the kind of little girl who corrected her teachers when they got facts wrong, who organized her stuffed animals by height, who cried for an hour when she was 7 because she found out Pluto wasn't a planet anymore and felt personally betrayed by the universe. She was stubborn in a way that used to make me laugh and worry in equal measure, because I knew that same stubbornness would either save her or sink her one day, depending entirely on what she decided to be stubborn about. Her father, Frank, used to say she got it from me. I never argued with him about that. Megan was 26 when she brought Tyler Pratt home for the first time on a Sunday in October, the kind of crisp fall afternoon where the leaves on our street had just started turning. I remember I'd made a roast, because that's what you do when your daughter brings someone home for the first time. You cook the thing that says, "We are a family that takes care of each other," even if you don't say it out loud. He shook my hand too hard. I remember that, specifically, because it was the kind of handshake that isn't really for the other person. It's a performance of confidence, the kind men do when they want you to walk away thinking strong handshake, good man, without actually examining anything underneath it. He laughed too loud at his own jokes, the kind of laugh that invites the room to laugh along whether or not the joke earned it. And about 20 minutes into dinner, somewhere between the salad and the roast, he asked me, casually, like it was nothing, what our house was worth. "I don't really know," I said, which was a lie. I knew exactly what it was worth. I just didn't see why a man I'd known for 20 minutes needed to know it too. "You should get it appraised," he said. "Market's hot right now. You could probably get more than you think." Megan laughed it off. Tyler's into real estate, he can't help himself, and the dinner moved on. I didn't say anything that night. I just watched, the way you watch a storm building on the horizon, telling yourself it might still turn the other way, that the clouds might break up before they ever reach you. By the third dinner, a few weeks later, I'd seen enough. The way he talked over her, finishing her sentences wrong on purpose, like correcting her was a kind of affection. What she means is. He'd say, and then say something that wasn't at all what she meant. And Megan would just smile and let it go, like arguing about it would be more trouble than it was worth. The way he looked at his phone the whole time she talked about her new promotion at work, glancing up only once at the very end to say, "That's cute, babe," in the exact tone you'd use for a child's finger painting. I caught Frank's eye across the table that night. He didn't say anything either. But I saw it land on him too. That small sinking in recognition of something not being right. The kind you feel in your chest before your mind has even finished cataloging the evidence. I waited until they got engaged to say anything. I want to be honest about why I waited that long. It wasn't generosity, not entirely. Part of me hoped I was wrong, and the longer I waited, the more chances I gave reality to prove me wrong, before I had to risk everything by saying something out loud. I wasn't wrong, and some nights, even now, years later, I wish to God I had been. I sat her down at my kitchen table on a Tuesday evening. The same table she'd done her homework on for 18 years, spelling tests and algebra, and a college application essay she'd cried over twice before finally getting it right. The same table where I'd bandaged her knees more times than I could count, where Frank had taught her to play chess, badly, both of them cheating just enough to make the other one laugh. "Megan," I said, "I don't think this is the right man for you." She didn't yell that night. That came later in other conversations. That night, she just went very still, the way she used to when she was little, and trying not to cry in front of me, chin slightly lowered, jaw tight, eyes fixed on a point just past my shoulder instead of on my face. "You don't know him like I do," she said. "Maybe not," I said, "but I know what it looks like when a man respects a woman. And I don't see it, sweetheart. I see someone who likes the idea of you a great deal. I'm not sure he sees you." "That's not fair," she said, her voice climbing slightly. "You've had 3 dinners with him, Mom. 3. You don't get to decide who he is from 3 dinners. "You're right," I said. "I don't know everything about him. I just know what I've watched. And I love you too much not to say something, even if you hate me for it." "I don't hate you," she said too quickly, in the voice of someone who is already starting to. She got up from that table without another word and let herself out. And I sat there alone for a long time after, staring at the roast I'd made that night, that nobody had finished, wondering if I'd just done something I'd spend the rest of my life regretting. Not the warning itself, but the cost of having given it. 3 weeks of silence followed. 3 weeks of me staring at my phone at odd hours, rereading old texts from before any of this, the easy ones. "Mom, can you watch Bailey this weekend? Can you send me Grandma's stuffing recipe? I miss you. Can we get lunch?" Wondering if I'd just traded my daughter's whole future presence in my life for the satisfaction of having said something true. She called eventually, on a Sunday, and we talked about something else entirely. Her work, the weather, nothing about Tyler. Both of us carefully stepping around the conversation, like it was a hole in the floor neither of us wanted to fall back into. We never really resolved it. We just agreed, without saying so, to set it down and not pick it back up. The morning of her wedding, I tried one more time, not to stop her. By then I understood there was no stopping her, that some decisions a person has to make for themselves even when everyone who loves them can see exactly where the road leads. I just needed her to know the door was still open. She was standing in front of the mirror in the dressing room at the venue, in her dress, her hair half done, a makeup artist fussing over her eyeliner. I asked the woman for a moment alone, and she stepped out, and it was just the two of us and Megan's reflection. "I love you," I told her reflection, because it felt easier than saying it to her face. "No matter what happens, that doesn't change. If you ever need anything, anything at all, I am always going to be right here." For 1 second, just one, I saw my little girl again in that mirror, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and grip my arm so tight it left marks, certain that as long as she was touching me, nothing in the world could reach her. Then it was gone. replaced by a 28-year-old bride with a schedule to keep and a makeup artist waiting outside the door. "Then act like it," she said, not unkindly but firm. "Today is supposed to be happy." So I did. I let it be happy. I walked her down the aisle myself. Her father had passed 3 years before, suddenly, a heart attack in his sleep that none of us saw coming, and she'd asked me, months earlier, if I would walk her down in his place. I said yes before she'd even finished the question. And whatever I privately believed about Tyler Pratt, I never once let it show on that walk. I smiled through every photograph. I danced with her at the reception until my feet ached inside shoes that were a half size too small. I hugged Tyler when the night ended and told him to take care of my daughter, and he smiled back at me with a warmth that never once reached his eyes and said, "Always, Carol," in the tone of a man closing a deal rather than making a promise. 4 years later, almost to the month, my phone rang at 11 o'clock at night. Megan was crying so hard I could barely make out the words. "He's gone," she kept saying. "He's just gone." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't need to. I pulled on the closest pair of shoes I could find, grabbed my keys, and drove 40 minutes to her house, still in my pajamas, hands shaking on the wheel the entire way, my mind running through every version of "I told you so" I would never let myself say out loud. Not that night, not ever, no matter how much. In some small and shameful corner of myself, I felt the truth of it. I want that on the record, because for years afterward, she treated me like I'd said it anyway. Like those words had been sitting on my tongue the whole time, just waiting for permission to come out. They never were. I held her on her kitchen floor that night, the same kitchen floor where 4 years earlier I'd watched her unwrap a wedding gift and laugh at something. Tyler whispered in her ear. Held her the same way I'd held her through every broken heart since she was 14 years old, smoothing her hair back from her wet face, saying nothing because there was nothing to say that would actually help, just letting her cry until she had nothing left to cry with. Upstairs, her son slept through all of it, 11 months old. Too young to understand that the life he'd been born into had just quietly ended underneath him while he slept, safe and unaware, in a crib his father had assembled badly, with the instructions still rolled up in a drawer because Tyler had never quite gotten around to checking his work. His name was Caleb, and neither of us had any idea yet how much that little boy was going to need me, or how badly, in time, his mother would decide she could live without me being there for him at all. Megan didn't fall apart the way I expected her to. Within a year of the divorce, she'd thrown herself into work the way some people throw themselves into running marathons. Like if she just moved fast enough, the pain couldn't catch up with her. She'd always been smart, sharper than me in most ways, and she used that. She started leaving for the office before 7, and coming home after Caleb's bedtime more nights than I like to count. And when I gently pointed that out once, she said, "I'm building something, Mom, for him, so he never has to wonder if we're okay." I didn't push back. I understood that kind of fear too well. The fear of a child growing up the way you did, scraping by, watching their mother count change at the grocery store. She got promoted twice in 18 months at the marketing firm where she worked. She started showing up in the kind of circles she used to only read about: charity galas, school board committees, a friend group of other working mothers who all seemed to wear the same expensive, effortless blazers and use phrases like intentional parenting and curating your circle. She started a book club that I don't think ever actually discussed a book. She got her hair done at a salon downtown that charged more for a single visit than I used to spend in 3 months. I was proud of her. I want to say that clearly because what happened later makes it easy to forget that part. I used to sit in my kitchen some evenings looking at photos she'd post. Caleb in a little blazer at some charity luncheon, Megan laughing with women I didn't recognize, captions about gratitude and growth. and feel something swell up in my chest that was simple, uncomplicated pride. Look what she built. Look what she survived. But somewhere in that rebuilding, I noticed something else happening too. Megan started talking about moving forward a lot, about not living in the past, about how Caleb needed stability, needed normalcy, needed a mother who had her life together. And slowly, without either of us naming it out loud, I understood that I had become part of what she was trying to move forward from. Not because I'd done anything wrong during the divorce. I hadn't. I'd shown up every single time she called, watched Caleb every time she needed me to, never once said his father's name with anything but careful neutrality in front of the boy, even on the nights I wanted to say a great deal more than that. But I had been right about Tyler. And I came to believe, slowly and reluctantly, that every time Megan looked at me, some small, stubborn part of her remembered that, and resented it, the way you resent a person who watched you fall, even when they were the one who'd tried hardest to catch you. It came out sideways, the way these things usually do. One afternoon, about 2 years after the divorce, I showed up early to pick Caleb up. 15 minutes early. Nothing dramatic, just a mother eager to see her grandson. And Megan was standing in the driveway with 2 of her new friends from work. Women I'd never met, holding to-go coffee cups mid-law about something I'd never know the punchline to. The laughing stopped, just slightly, when they saw my car pull up. Not dramatically. Just a small pause, a small recalibration, the kind you'd only notice if you were watching closely, and I was always watching closely where Megan was concerned. "Oh, this is Caleb's grandmother," Megan said when I got out of the car, not my mom, not Carol. Caleb's grandmother, like I was a service she'd hired, a babysitting agency with a friendly face. One of the women, blonde, in a blazer the color of oatmeal, smiled at me and said, "Oh, how nice that you're so hands-on," in a voice that made it sound less like a compliment and more like a gentle diagnosis. "How nice that you're still useful at your age." "I try to be," I said, and smiled back, because what else was there to do in a driveway with strangers? I didn't say anything more in that moment. I just got Caleb's booster seat out of my trunk, the way I always did, clicked it into place in the back of my car, helped him climb in, listened to him chatter about his day at preschool, the entire ride home. But in the car, somewhere around the second red light, I understood something I hadn't let myself understand before. It wasn't only that I'd been right about Tyler. It was that I didn't fit the life she was building. The blazers, the galas, the friends who talked about self-care and boundaries, like they were new inventions nobody had ever practiced before. And somewhere in that world, an old-fashioned mother who still believed in saying grace before dinner, who still wrote thank you notes by hand, who still walked kids to the bus stop herself instead of hiring someone to do it, didn't read as family. She read as a loose thread, something to be managed, introduced carefully, kept at arm's length so it wouldn't snag on the image she'd worked so hard, so genuinely hard, to rebuild. I want to be fair to her here, because I think it's important. I don't believe Megan woke up one day and decided to be ashamed of me. I think it happened the way most quiet betrayals happen, not as a single decision, but as 1,000 small ones, each one small enough to justify on its own. A driveway introduction, a dinner where I wasn't mentioned, a conversation where she let a friend's joke about helicopter grandmas land without correcting it. None of it felt, to her, like a betrayal in the moment. It only added up to one over time, the way water adds up to a flood. One drop never looks like the thing it eventually becomes. She started keeping our visits shorter after that driveway afternoon, tighter. She'd drop Caleb off and pick him up at almost the exact minute she said she would, like she was clocking in and out of a job, instead of leaving her son with his grandmother. If I asked to keep him an extra hour, just one more hour, just to finish the puzzle we'd started, just to read one more chapter, she had a reason ready. A work call, a class, a friend's thing. Next time, she'd say, already reaching for Caleb's hand. I promise, next time we'll have more time. I told myself I was imagining it. Mothers get busy. Life gets full. I'd been a working mother once, too, juggling a job at the clinic and a husband and a daughter who needed picking up from a dozen different places. And I remembered how thin that kind of busy can stretch a person. How easy it is to shortchange the people who love you, most simply because they're the ones who'll forgive you for it. So I didn't push. I just made the most of the time I got, the way you learn to do with anything precious and rationed. And that's when I started teaching Caleb the things that would later get me locked out of his life completely. And 8 months after that, the things that would bring him home. People who only knew me as Caleb's grandmother, that careful, distant title Megan had started using, never understood that I wasn't trying to raise him. I was trying to make sure he survived whatever life decided to hand him, the way you make sure a child knows how to swim before you ever let them near deep water. You don't teach a child to swim because you expect them to drown. You teach them because the lake doesn't care what you expect. It started small, the way most important things do. The first time I had him for a full Saturday on my own, he was about 3.5, old enough to talk in full sentences, young enough that the world still seemed to him like a place built entirely out of kindness. We were in the parking lot of the grocery store. Caleb holding my hand, swinging our arms between us the way small children do, when a man in a gray van rolled down his window and called out to him, sweet as anything. Hey there, buddy, can you help me find my puppy? He got loose right over there. I felt Caleb's hand twitch in mine, that small instinctive pull toward kindness that lives in every good child. He opened his mouth to answer. I didn't yell. I didn't grab him dramatically or make a scene that would frighten him more than the moment already warranted. I just stepped, smoothly, between Caleb and the van, smiled in the polite, unbothered way you'd smile at someone asking for directions, and said, "We're not able to help today," and kept walking, my hand firm but gentle around Caleb's, guiding him toward the store entrance without any rush in my step at all. Once we were inside, in the quiet of the cereal aisle, I crouched down to his eye level. I always crouched, always made myself smaller so he wasn't looking up at an authority figure but talking to someone on his own level, and I said calmly, "Caleb, I want to tell you something important. If a grown-up you don't know ever asks you for help, finding a puppy, finding directions, carrying something to their car, anything at all, you don't go with them. Not one step. Do you know why?" He shook his head, his eyes wide, more curious than frightened. Children that age take in almost anything if you don't scare them while you're teaching them. Fear closes a child's mind, but curiosity opens it, and I'd learned, somewhere over the years, the difference between the two. Because grown-ups don't actually need help from kids, I told him. If a grown-up really lost their puppy, they'd ask another grown-up. A mommy, a daddy, a worker in the store with a name tag. Grown-ups asking kids for help. That's not how the real world works. So if it ever happens, that's your signal that something's wrong, and you come find me, or any other grown-up nearby, as fast as your legs can carry you. "Okay, Grandma," he said, simply, the way children accept enormous truths with total ease, and then asked if he could pick out the cereal with the toucan on the box. And that was that. After that day, it became a quiet rhythm between us. Not lectures, not anything heavy enough to frighten a small boy. More like games, woven into ordinary afternoons. I taught him to scan a room when he walked in. Just a habit. Just where are the doors? Where are the grown-ups you know? Where would you run if you needed to? We practiced it at restaurants, at the library, at his cousin's birthday party. "Where's the way out, Caleb?" I'd whisper, and he'd point, proud of himself, like it was a game we were winning together. I taught him that if anyone ever grabbed him, anyone, even someone claiming to know his mother, even someone in a uniform he didn't recognize, the worst thing he could do was stay quiet and polite, I taught him he had my full permission, my encouragement even, to scream, to bite, to kick, to make the loudest, most embarrassing scene of his entire life, regardless of what the person grabbing him said or how nice they seemed. It is never rude to be loud if you're scared, I told him once, very seriously, on a bench outside his preschool. I would rather you embarrass me in front of the whole world than stay quiet to be polite. Do you understand? You will never, ever be in trouble with me for being too loud about something scary. And I taught him a code word. Blueberry. A small, silly, easy-to-remember word that only the people I trusted absolutely would know. Myself. His pediatrician's office for emergency pickups. Eventually his after-school program once I'd had a quiet word with the director. If anyone ever told him, "Your mom sent me, get in the car," he was to ask immediately, without hesitation, for the word. No word, no car. No exceptions, no matter who was asking, no matter how nice they seemed, no matter how much they seemed to know about him. We practiced it like a game on the back porch. One afternoon, Caleb giggling, pretending to be a stern security guard demanding the password from me before I was allowed past an invisible gate he'd built out of porch furniture. I laughed along with him, genuinely, even while some quieter, more serious part of me was watching the lesson take root, hoping with everything in me that he'd never actually need it, and teaching it to him anyway, because hope has never once been a safety plan. Megan found out about the code word by accident, almost a year in. Caleb mentioned it casually at dinner one night, proud of himself, the way kids are proud of secrets they're allowed to keep. The way a secret feels like a badge of honor when you're 4 years old. She didn't think it was clever. She thought it was insane. "A code word, Mom?" she said, after Caleb had gone off to play, her voice low but sharp. "He's 4 years old. You're turning him into someone who thinks the entire world is full of kidnappers waiting around every corner." "It's not paranoia," I said. "It's preparation. There's a real difference, Megan, and I wish you could see it." "It's fear-mongering," she said, and I watched her arms cross tightly over her chest. The same defensive posture she'd had at 16, whenever she knew, somewhere underneath the argument, that I might have a point she didn't want to concede. This is exactly the kind of paranoid, old-fashioned thing I didn't want him growing up around. He's a little boy. Let him be a little boy. I wanted to tell her that letting him be a little boy and teaching him to protect himself weren't opposites. That the safest children I'd ever known weren't the ones who'd been shielded from every hard truth, but the ones who'd been quietly, lovingly prepared for them. I wanted to tell her that I'd raised her in a world I thought I understood completely, and that somewhere along the way I'd learned, painfully, how much less safe it actually was than I'd believed, and that I didn't want to make that same mistake twice with her son. But she'd already turned away, already decided in the particular, practiced way she'd been deciding things about me since she was 26 years old, and I'd warned her about a man in pressed shirts who asked what houses were worth, that I was the problem and not the solution. I kept teaching him anyway, quietly, carefully, not behind her back exactly. I never once hid it, never once whispered a lesson to him like it was something shameful, but I stopped mentioning it over dinner. I folded it instead into ordinary moments, the way you fold vegetables into a meal a picky child would otherwise refuse. A passing comment in a parking lot, a quiet game on a porch, 5 careful minutes here and there that no one but the two of us ever needed to know about. I had no idea, watching him toddle around that porch playing security guard, giggling, demanding I say the magic word before I could pass. I had absolutely no idea that I was running out of time to teach him anything at all. The turn came on a Sunday afternoon, almost a year and a half after the parking lot, when Caleb was 5. I'd picked him up from school that Friday like always. Megan had started a new position that meant longer hours, and I was grateful for the extra time with him, even if I knew better than to say that out loud. We'd had a good weekend, Pancake Saturday morning. A trip to the park. That evening, walking back to the car, a man jogged past us a little too close, a little too slow, and out of nothing but habit, Caleb stepped behind my leg and said, low and steady, "Grandma, that man's looking at us weird." He was right. The man circled back twice before finally walking on. I didn't make a big production of it in front of Caleb. Just praised him quietly in the car, told him he'd done exactly the right thing, noticing like that. I made the mistake of telling Megan about it when she picked him up Sunday night. I thought she'd want to know. Her son was sharp enough to notice something I almost missed myself. I thought, for one foolish second, that this might finally be the thing that made her see what I'd actually been building in him. Instead, her face went tight in a way I'd learned to recognize and dread. "So now he's scared of joggers," she said. "He's not scared. He's aware. There's a difference, Megan. I keep telling you." "You keep telling me a lot of things," she said, and something in her voice had hardened past anything I'd heard from her before. "Do you know what his teacher told me last week? That Caleb corrected another kid for getting in a car with someone he didn't recognize at pickup. It was the kid's own uncle, Mom. He humiliated a 5-year-old in front of the whole carpool line because of one of your lessons. That's not humiliation. That's a child doing exactly what he's supposed to do when something looks wrong." "It's embarrassing," she snapped. "Do you understand that? People are starting to ask me what's wrong with my son. My son, not yours. I should have stopped there." "I know that now, but 20-some years of being told I was overreacting, overprotective, too much. It came up out of me before I could stop it. I would rather Caleb embarrass a carpool line than end up a headline, Megan. I watched you marry a man I begged you not to marry because I was too afraid of embarrassing you. I'm done being quiet to make people comfortable." The silence after that was the kind that has weight to it. I watched something close behind her eyes. Not anger exactly, something colder than anger. "You don't get to use Tyler against me every time I disagree with you," she said quietly. "I am so tired of paying for one mistake for the rest of my life. I'm not punishing you. I'm trying to protect him." "You're trying to win," she said. "You've been trying to win since the day I brought Tyler home, and I am done letting you use my son to do it." She took Caleb's hand and walked him to the car without looking back at me. I stood in my own driveway and watched my 5-year-old grandson twist around in his booster seat to wave at me through the back window, small and confused, while his mother backed out without a single glance in my direction. I didn't hear from her for 9 days. On the 10th day, she showed up at my door, not to apologize, not to talk, to tell me, in a voice so calm it frightened me more than yelling would have, that she needed space from me. That she needed to figure out, in her words, what kind of influence is actually healthy for my son right now. That she'd let me know when, if, she was ready for me to see him again. I asked her how long that might be. She looked at me the way you look at a stranger who's asked you for the time and said, "I don't know yet, Mom. I really don't know." Then she got back in her car and for the first time in 5 years, drove away from my house with my grandson in the back seat and no plan, none at all, to bring him back. 8 months passed. I won't pretend they were easy. There were birthdays I wasn't invited to. A school photo I only saw because a neighbor, kind enough to still speak to me, sent it to my phone without saying where she got it. I wrote Caleb letters I never mailed, just to have somewhere to put the missing. I heard about him in pieces, secondhand, the way you hear about someone else's child. He'd lost a tooth. He joined a soccer team. He still asked about me sometimes. That part came from the same neighbor, in a text that ended with, "I'm sorry, Carol." I really am. I didn't fight Megan publicly. I didn't show up at the school. Didn't call the house repeatedly. Didn't do any of the things a more desperate woman might have done. I'd raised one daughter who needed space to make her own mistakes, even when those mistakes broke my heart. and some stubborn part of me believed I owed her the same thing now, even though it was Caleb paying for it, not her. What I didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that none of those 8 months of silence had touched the one thing that actually mattered. Caleb hadn't forgotten a single lesson. It happened on an ordinary Thursday. The kind of afternoon nobody remembers the weather from until later, when they're asked to describe it for a police report. Caleb was at after-school pickup, the same carpool line where, months earlier, he'd embarrassed his mother by questioning another child getting into the wrong car. The line was long that day, parents running late, the usual after-school chaos of backpacks and bikes, and kids weaving between cars. A car Caleb didn't recognize pulled up near the edge of the lot, not in the pickup line itself, just close enough. A man got out, calm, unhurried, the kind of calm that doesn't draw attention from busy adults checking their phones. He walked straight toward Caleb and crouched down to his height, the exact way a stranger should never approach a child, and said, smiling, "Hey buddy, your mom sent me. She's running late, asked me to grab you." Caleb told me later that the man even knew his name. Knew the school. Knew enough small, true details stitched together to sound believable to anyone who hadn't spent years training a 5-year-old to listen for exactly this. Caleb didn't go quiet and polite, the way so many of us are raised to be around adults. He didn't get in the car. He took one step back, looked the man dead in the eye, the way I'd taught him to do with the grocery store stranger 2 years before, and said, loud enough for the parents nearby to hear, "What's the blueberry?" The man hesitated, just for a second, but a second was all it took. Caleb didn't wait to see if he had an answer. He turned and ran, screaming exactly the way I'd taught him to, not crying, not whimpering, screaming, the kind of sound that makes every adult within 100 feet turn their head, straight toward the cluster of teachers managing the carpool line, yelling the one thing I'd drilled into him since he was 3 years old. "This man is not my mom's friend. Help me, this man is not my mom's friend." By the time a teacher reached him, the man was already walking, fast, not running, careful not to draw more attention than he already had, back to his car. He was gone before anyone thought to write down a plate number. Caleb wasn't hurt, not a scratch on him. But somewhere in the chaos of phone calls and police reports, and a school administrator's shaking hands, Megan got the call that every mother prays she never gets, the one that starts with "your son is safe, but," and drove to that school faster than she had ever driven anywhere in her life, not yet knowing that the thing that had saved her son was the exact thing she'd spent 8 months punishing me for teaching him. Megan brought him over within the hour. I was standing at my front door before her car had even fully stopped in the driveway, and Caleb came out of the back seat at a dead run, the way only a 5-year-old can run, like his legs hadn't yet learned the concept of holding anything back. He hit me hard enough to knock the wind out of me a little, both arms wrapped around my waist, his face pressed into my stomach. "Grandma," he said, muffled. I remembered everything. I remembered all of it. "I know you did, baby." I knelt down so I could see his face, brushing his hair back the way I had 1,000 times before those 8 months stole the chance from me. "I know." Megan stood at the end of the driveway for a moment before she came any closer, like she wasn't sure she'd earned the right to walk onto my porch yet. When she finally did, she didn't say anything clever or rehearsed. She just stood there with her arms wrapped around herself, eyes swollen from crying the whole drive over, and said, "Can I come in?" "You don't have to ask that," I told her. "This is still your home too." We sat at that same kitchen table, the one that had held so many versions of us over the years. The table where I'd warned her about Tyler, the table where she'd cried after the divorce, the table where, 8 months ago, I would have given almost anything just to have her sitting across from me again, even angry. Caleb fell asleep on the living room couch within 20 minutes Worn down by an adrenaline crash no 5-year-old's body knows how to manage gracefully. Through the doorway, I could see him curled up under the same quilt I'd had since before Megan was born. One hand still loosely holding the stuffed rabbit he refused to admit he still slept with. Megan watched him for a long moment before she spoke again. "I keep thinking about all the things I said to you," she said quietly. "The carpool line, the code word comment. I called it fear-mongering, Mom. I actually told you that you were ruining him." "You were scared," I said, "of a lot of things that had nothing to do with me." "Don't do that," she said, and there was something almost pleading in it. "Don't make excuses for me right now. I need you to let me say this." So I let her. "I think I've spent 5 years being so afraid of looking like I made a mistake that I turned you into the mistake instead," she said. "Every time you were right about something, Tyler, the code word, all of it, it didn't feel like being protected. It felt like being graded. And I couldn't stand failing in front of you one more time, so I just stopped letting you grade me. I cut you out instead of admitting you'd been right twice in a row about the people I loved most. I didn't say anything right away. I let the words sit in the room the way you let a hot pan cool before you touch it. I never wanted to be right at your expense," I finally said. "I wanted to be wrong about Tyler so badly, Megan. You have no idea how badly I wanted to walk into your wedding and feel like a fool for worrying." "I know that now," she said. "I didn't know it then. I think some part of me needed you to be the villain in my story, because the alternative was admitting my own mother saw something about my life that I refused to see myself. That's not your failure. That was mine." We talked until almost midnight. Not everything got resolved that one night. I don't believe in stories where 5 years of distance dissolve in a single conversation, no matter how honest it is. But something shifted in that kitchen that hadn't shifted in a long, long time. For the first time since Tyler Pratt walked into our lives, my daughter looked at me like an ally instead of an obstacle. Before she left that night, carrying her sleeping son out to the car, she stopped in the doorway. The same doorway where, 8 months earlier, she'd told me I wasn't welcome in his life anymore. "I want you back in his life," she said, "all the way back. Not supervised visits, not careful introductions to my friends. Back. Is that something you still want?" "It's the only thing I've wanted for 8 months, I told her. She nodded, blinking hard, and carried my grandson out to the car. I should tell you about Sherry, because she matters more to this story than I think she ever realized. Sherry Donnelly lived 2 houses down from Megan, a woman about my age, the kind of neighbor who still believed in bringing over a casserole when something went wrong, who'd quietly kept me updated through those 8 months out of nothing but plain decency. She was also, as it turned out, far more connected to Megan's professional circle than either of us had understood. Sherry's daughter worked at the same marketing firm as Megan, and within a week of the carpool line incident, the story, Caleb's story, the code word, the running, the screaming exactly the right thing at exactly the right people, had made its way through that office in the particular, unstoppable way stories do among people who like each other and worry about each other's children. Megan told me later that a woman from her office, someone she barely knew outside of conference room pleasantries, stopped her in the break room one morning and said, "I heard what happened with your son. That code word thing, where did you even learn to teach a kid that?" That's incredible. Megan said she stood there holding her coffee, completely unable to answer honestly, because the honest answer was, "I didn't teach him that." I mocked the woman who did. She told me she went into the office bathroom after that conversation and cried for the second time that week. Not from fear this time, but from something closer to shame. The specific, suffocating shame of being praised for something you'd spent years quietly tearing down. It didn't stop there. The story kept traveling, the way these things do, gathering small distortions and additions the way stories always do. By the third or fourth retelling, some people had Caleb fighting off the man entirely. Others had me personally training him like some kind of survivalist. Megan started fielding questions she didn't know how to answer gracefully. "Your mother sounds amazing. You must be so close." Where did she learn child safety like that? Was she in law enforcement? She wasn't, of course. I was his medical secretary for 31 years. I learned what I taught Caleb the same way most mothers learn anything that matters. From fear, from paying close attention to the world, from refusing to assume that being careful was the same thing as being paranoid. But Megan told me that every one of those well-meaning questions felt like a small, specific punishment, because each one forced her to either lie about how she'd treated me or tell the truth and watch people's faces change. She chose the truth more often than I expected her to. I think, in its own painful way, that was part of how she started forgiving herself. By refusing to keep hiding what she'd done, even when the easier story would have made her look better. I didn't ask for any of that. I want to be clear about that. I never wanted Megan humiliated in front of her coworkers, never wanted this turned into some kind of public reckoning. But I won't pretend there wasn't a small, quiet part of me, the part that had spent 8 months locked out of my own grandson's life, that didn't mind, even a little, that the truth had found its own way into the open. I want to be honest about the months that followed, because I think it does this story a disservice to make them sound easier than they were. Megan and I didn't fall back into our old rhythm overnight. There were weeks where the visits felt natural again, where she'd drop Caleb off and stay for coffee, lingering in my kitchen the way she used to, before Tyler, before the divorce, before any of it. And there were other weeks where I could feel her still flinching slightly, whenever I offered an opinion about anything involving Caleb. Like she was braced for me to remind her, even unintentionally, of everything she'd gotten wrong. I had to learn to be careful too, in my own way. There was a temptation, more than once, to let a comment slip. Something just barely short of "I told you so." And I had to catch myself every time. Because I understood, finally, that being right had never once made either of us happier. It had only ever made us further apart. Caleb, for his part, adjusted faster than either of us. Children often do. Within a month, our Saturdays had resumed almost exactly as they'd been before. Pancakes, the park, his small steady hand in mine while we practiced, without either of us calling it practice, the same habits that had saved his life. Scanning a room, knowing where the exits were, trusting his own instincts over a stranger's smile. Megan started sitting in on some of those lessons herself, eventually. Not out of suspicion this time, out of something that looked more and more like respect. "Teach me the things you taught him," she said one Saturday, sitting cross-legged on my living room floor like she had as a teenager. "All of it. I want to know what I almost threw away." So I did. Not as a victory lap. I never once felt like I'd won anything in all this, but because she asked, sincerely, and because some part of healing I've come to believe is letting the people who hurt you do the work of understanding exactly what they hurt. There was an afternoon, maybe 4 months after Caleb came back into my life for good, when Megan found me in the kitchen and asked the question I think she'd been working up to for a while. "Do you forgive me?" she asked. "For all of it, not just the 8 months. For years, Mom. For making you feel like you had to earn the right to be in our lives." I thought about lying, about saying something easy, something that would let us both move past the question faster. But I'd spent too many years being careful with the truth around Megan. And look where careful had gotten us. "I'm working on it," I told her honestly. "I forgive you for being scared. I forgive you for not knowing how to carry what happened with Tyler without taking some of it out on me. But I'm not going to pretend those 8 months didn't change something in me too. I don't think I'll ever fully get back the version of myself that existed before I had to wonder if I'd ever see my grandson again. She nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer and respected it more for not being softer. "That's fair," she said. "I just need you to know I'm not going anywhere again, whatever it takes to prove that." I believed her. I want to be clear about that too. I did believe her, completely, by that point. But belief and certainty are different things, and somewhere in those 8 months of silence, I'd learned a kind of caution about my own daughter that I never imagined I'd need. It was around that same time that I started thinking, quietly, about what I actually wanted the rest of my life to look like. It was a Tuesday evening, about 5 months after Caleb came back into my life for good, when I found myself standing in my own backyard for no particular reason, just looking at the house. I'd lived there for over 30 years. Frank and I bought it the year before Megan was born, back when the neighborhood was still half built, when you could hear construction trucks on weekend mornings from 3 streets over. I'd painted nearly every room in that house myself at one point or another. I'd buried 2 cats in the far corner of that yard, under the maple tree that was now taller than the roofline. I had assumed, in the quiet, unexamined way you assume things about your own life, that I would die in that house. But standing there that evening, I noticed something had shifted in me that I hadn't fully named yet. I'd spent 8 months in that house, learning what silence actually sounds like. Not peaceful silence, but the specific, ringing silence of a phone that doesn't ring, of a calendar with no visits marked on it, of a guest room that stays made up because nobody's coming. I'd absorbed that silence into the walls somehow, the way a house absorbs the smell of years of cooking. Even now, with Caleb back in my life, with Megan calling every few days, with Saturdays full again, even now, some part of me still flinched a little whenever the house got quiet, bracing out of habit for a silence I no longer needed to brace for. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a house that remembered being lonely better than I wanted to remember it. I called my sister, Diane, who'd moved out to Asheville 11 years earlier, mostly because I needed to say the idea out loud to someone before I let myself believe it. "I've been thinking about something," I told her. "I think I might want to sell the house." "Carol Bennett wants to leave Columbus," she said, half lauding. "After 30 years, where is this coming from?" I tried to explain it to her clumsily at first, that it wasn't about running from anything, that it wasn't punishment or anger or even sadness exactly. It was something closer to a recognition that I'd spent the last several years of my life as a supporting character in everyone else's story. Frank's widow, Megan's mother, Caleb's grandmother. And that somewhere in surviving those 8 months of silence, I discovered I still had things I wanted for myself, separate from any of those roles that I hadn't let myself want in a very long time. "I'm not running away from Megan," I told Diane. "I finally believe she's not going anywhere again. This isn't about her. I think, for the first time since Frank died, I just want to choose something for me." I didn't make the decision that night. I sat with it for several more weeks, turning it over the way you turn over any decision that feels too large to make quickly. I talked to Caleb's school counselor, just to understand, broadly, what kind of distance was manageable for a grandmother who still wanted to be present in a young child's life. I looked at flights, at drive times, at what it would mean practically to live 4 states away from my grandson instead of 15 minutes. And then, on a Sunday afternoon in early spring, I finally told Megan. We were sitting on my back porch, the same porch where Caleb had once demanded I say a magic word before letting me through his pretend gate, watching him chase fireflies in the yard as the evening came down soft and blue around us. "I want to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you react." She turned to look at me, something cautious already moving behind her eyes. We'd both gotten careful with each other in ways neither of us had fully shed yet, even 5 months into healing. "I'm thinking about selling the house," I said, "and moving to Asheville to be near your Aunt Diane." For a moment, she didn't say anything at all. I watched her face do several things in quick succession. Surprise, then something that looked almost like fear, then something more complicated underneath both of those. "Is this about what happened?" she finally asked quietly. "The 8 months? Are you punishing me?" "No," I said, and I meant it as completely as I'd ever meant anything. "Megan, look at me. This isn't about you at all, not in the way you're afraid it is. I spent 8 months in that house learning how to be alone in a way I never wanted to learn. And when you and Caleb came back into my life, I realized something I hadn't let myself realize in years. That being your mother and being Caleb's grandmother isn't the only thing I'm allowed to be. I still get to want things. I still get to build something new, even at 61. But I just got you back," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word, raw in a way that told me she meant it completely. "You're not losing me," I said, reaching over to take her hand, the same hand I'd held through skinned knees and a wedding aisle and a kitchen floor at 11 o'clock at night. "I am not disappearing on you, Megan. I will be on a plane every chance I get. You and Caleb will have a standing invitation to Asheville for every school break for the rest of your lives. This isn't an ending. I just don't want my whole life to live inside a house I built, waiting for other people to need me in it." We sat with that for a long time, the two of us, while Caleb laughed somewhere in the dark yard, chasing light he could never quite catch. "I think," Megan said eventually, very quietly, "that for the first time, I actually understand what you've been trying to teach both of us. Caleb and me, that loving someone and needing them to need you aren't the same thing." "No," I said. "They're not. I learned that the hard way too, sweetheart. Later than I should have." She squeezed my hand, and out in the yard, Caleb came running up the porch steps, breathless, both fists closed carefully around something invisible and glowing. "Grandma, look," he said, opening his hands just enough to show me. I caught one. "You sure did," I told him, and for just a moment, the three of us sat there together in the last of the light, none of us needing to say anything else at all. Looking back now, I think what happened to Megan and me wasn't really about Tyler, or even about the carpool line. I think it was about something bigger than our family. Something I see happening in almost every family I know. We live in a country that's gotten very good at performing a perfect life and very bad at admitting an imperfect one. Megan wasn't a bad daughter. She was a woman raised, like so many of us now, to believe that needing help, especially help from a mother who'd once been wrong about nothing, was a kind of failure she couldn't afford to be seen having. Every blazer, every gala, every carefully worded caption was armor against the fear that someone might look too closely and see the cracks underneath. And I think a lot of older parents watching this know exactly what I mean. We raised children in a world that taught them success was a performance you couldn't pause. And somewhere in that performance, people like me, the ones who remembered the cracks from before the armor went on, become inconvenient. Not unloved, just inconvenient. A reminder of a version of the story that doesn't photograph well. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it because I think it's the truest thing this whole experience taught me. And I think a lot of you watching are living some version of it right now. Quietly edited out of your own child's polished life. Wondering if you did something wrong, when maybe the truth is simpler and sadder than that. Maybe you just didn't fit the picture they were trying so hard to build. What I'd say to you, if you're sitting where I once sat, is this: don't shrink yourself to fit back into that picture. Keep teaching what you know is true. Keep showing up the way you know how. The picture cracks eventually. It always does. And when it does, you want to be standing exactly where you've always stood, not somewhere smaller, waiting to be let back in. The house sold in 11 days. I spent my last week there, walking through empty rooms, touching door frames, remembering everything that had happened inside them. The kitchen table where I'd warned Megan about Tyler, the floor where I'd held her the night her marriage ended, the porch where Caleb once made me say a magic word before he'd let me through his pretend gate. Megan came by the day before the movers arrived, and we sat on the bare floor with a bottle of wine, talking the way we used to before any of it. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach both of us," she said. "That loving someone and needing them to need you aren't the same thing." "No," I told her. "They're not. I learned that the hard way, too." I moved to Asheville 3 weeks later into a smaller house with a porch that faces the sunset instead of the sunrise. The first months weren't easy. Grief doesn't care how good your reasons are. But I joined a book club that actually reads the books. I started volunteering, teaching grown adults to read, watching their faces light up the same way Caleb's used to, over a word he'd just sounded out for the first time. I built a garden bed myself, slightly crooked, the way Frank would have built it if he'd ever had the patience. Megan and Caleb visited that summer. He ran the length of the airport to get to me, the same way he had the day she finally brought him back. On the last night of their visit, sitting on my new porch, Megan said the thing I think she'd been working up to the whole trip. "You were never trying to be right, Mom. I think I just needed you to be wrong, because it would have meant my life made more sense." "I know that now," I told her. "I think I knew it a long time ago, too. Caleb is 7 now. He still remembers the code word. Though these days, I think it's less a safety lesson to him and more a story he tells, proved himself that he was always brave. Megan tells me he's started teaching it to his little cousin, crouched down to her height in someone's backyard, making sure she understands every word before he lets it go. I don't regret what I taught him, even though it cost me 8 months I'll never get back. I don't regret saying the hard thing instead of the comfortable one, even when it meant standing alone in a doorway, watching the people I loved most drive away without me. What I learned, starting over at 61 in a town I chose entirely for myself, is that being right was never actually what I wanted. I wanted my daughter safe. I wanted my grandson safe. And somewhere underneath all of it, I wanted to matter to them. Not because they needed me to survive, but because they chose me, freely, once they no longer had to. It took almost losing both of them to understand I'd had that all along. If this story meant something to you, I'd love for you to stick around. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, has there ever been a moment where someone you loved finally understood, almost too late, that you'd been trying to protect them all along? I read every comment, and I promise I'll be right here reading yours.